the consequences become, well, if I spend more time managing my emotions, with these devices and with the consumption of various media and other apps at the expense of connecting with others, I'm constantly amazed at this new field that's evolving called friendship coaches, right? So there are people who are friendship coaches, right? So they help young people learn how to make friends, which, to me is sort of shocking. But you can imagine a world where maybe we've lost that skill.
Welcome to AI to Z. Hosted by AirSwift's Chief Revenue Officer, Anna Frazzetto, we delve into artificial intelligence, health tech, and more. Tune in and journey with us into the future.
Welcome, Carl Marci, to the podcast. Carl is coming to us today, and he is a psychiatrist working at the forefront of research on the impact of digital technology. Carl has seen this transformation up close and developed a range of responses. I know your book, which I would like to talk about, Rewired, provides scientifically supported solutions for everyone who wants to restore their tech-life balance, from parents concerned about their children's exposure to the internet to stressed workers dealing with the deluge of emails and managing the expectations of 24/7 availability. So welcome, Carl.
Anna, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. So let's talk about the power of human touch and what is happening in our society today. I think this is a struggle that a lot of us are dealing with it at all ages. We're living in an age of digital distraction. So what are some of the challenges of engaging in human touch in a digital world today? Is that doable?
Yeah, well, first, let's talk about why human touch is so important. If you look at the human brain at birth, humans are unique among species in that the brain is only 10% developed. So that means that 90% of brain development occurs outside the womb. And if you think about the way society is organized, at least most societies, it's not until around the age 18 that children become emancipated. They can go off and vote and fight wars and do other things as young adults. 18 years is a long time, and 10% is not a lot of brain development. So anyone who's had children or been around young children knows you got to watch them constantly, right? So all of us have been the benefactors of some caregiver who has paid very close attention to us at an early age. So that's sort of point number one. We really need someone watching us. Point number two is we should not then be surprised that our brains have evolved to have a very complex network of neurons that allow us to make very powerful social and emotional connections, right? 18 years, right? If you think about the average life expectancy for much of our time on this planet was around 35 years. That's half of our time on this planet dedicated to raising our offspring, right? So clearly very important part of our lives. And then if you think about touch itself, there's been probably one of the most famous naturalistic experiments, which is a tragedy, but has been written about, is the Romanian orphanages that Ceausescu kind of oversaw. And I'll do the short version, but I describe it in some detail in the book. Essentially through a number of economic and authoritarian factors, there ended up being a lot of children born in Romania without enough food and without enough caregivers. And they ended up in these massive orphanages, which were severely understaffed. So you had an entire generation of children who were brought up from very early ages, birth through childhood, and now they're adults, that literally did not have anyone holding them and touching them. And so as soon as Ceausescu and his wife were assassinated, the Western aid groups come in. There's a famous 2020, the old television show documentary on this, and Western psychologists started to study these children because we want to understand. And you can imagine their brains were poorly developed. They had a tremendous amount of attention deficit disorders, emotional and mental health issues, all kinds of problems. So we know from that and other studies that physical touch is important. Now, your question is, what's going on in the digital age? right? So what are we doing? Well, I'm holding up my smartphone. We went from a time when, I grew up, the phone was a communication device, the television was an entertainment device, and the computer was a productivity device. Now I have all that and more access to the internet, commerce, an arm's reach away, right? So we put a tremendous amount of power in our pockets. And that is very alluring. It's very titillating, and it's very rewarding to the brain. And when I use the word reward very purposefully there, meaning it triggers the same reward centers that light up when we eat sugar, do cocaine or have sex, right? And so our brain says, I want more of that. And so we start to develop these habits. We start to consume more and more media. And that then starts to become how we regulate our emotions using this device and our consumption of various types of media and information, rather than connecting one-on-one with another person, which is what we've done for 99.9% of our time on this planet. So that begins to have consequences, which I'm happy to talk about.
So let's kind of build on that a little bit more. So how can we ensure that our use of technology doesn't come at the expense of human connection, which I think is what we're experiencing now?
That's right. So first, let's talk about the consequences, right? So the consequences become, well, if I spend more time managing my emotions, with these devices and with the consumption of various media and other apps, at the expense of connecting with others, a couple things happen. One, I can't soothe myself without it, right? So I learn to use media as an emotional tool, an emotional regulator. Number one. Number two, I preferentially choose connecting on this device because I don't develop the social skills I need to connect with others. I'm constantly amazed at this new field that's evolving called friendship coaches, right? So there are people who are friendship coaches, right? So they help young people learn how to make friends, which, to me is sort of shocking. But you start to think about it, you can imagine a world where maybe we've lost that skill. We haven't developed that very well. So as I use more and more technology, I'm connecting less face to face with other humans, regulating my emotions through technology. I begin to multitask more. I begin to stress the prefrontal cortex, an important part of the brain, which we can talk about, which is responsible for regulating our emotions and tamping down and controlling our reward centers. And I begin to become more depressed, more anxious, ultimately more lonely. And that's where we start to get into physical and mental health consequences. So these are really profound issues. And while I don't think we can blame Steve Jobs and the iPhone for all the increases in anxiety and depression over the last 10 years. We have had double-digit increases in just about every category of mental illness. Anxiety, depression, attention deficit disorder, substance use, tragically suicide, during a period that correlates very highly with our adoption of technology. And I don't think that's unrelated. So you want to talk a little bit about what we might be able to do about that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is a concern because it is affecting every generation, right? So, I often have conversations with families where kids are asking for cell phones and the age is getting earlier and earlier and earlier. So are we creating, are we starting to create these issues at a much younger age, and then it's going to be harder for them to get out of it?
Yeah, my daughter is 7, and going on 17, and not a day goes by where she doesn't say, "Daddy, when do I get my phone?" When I say, "When you're 14, when you're 14, when you're 14." She doesn't like that, but we try to set limits, and again, we can talk about where we put those guardrails, how we think about digital etiquette. But the point is that we need to start having a serious conversation about what is the expectation. Look, we don't let children drive an automobile, right, until they're 16 years of age. They have to pass a cognitive exam, understand the rules of the road. They have to pass a behavioral exam, right? They have to actually drive a car with someone watching them. And in most states, you have to have a chaperone for another 6 to 12 months, right? That's a lot, right? The society has learned that in order to protect ourselves and others, we need to put some of those guardrails in place. Yet we're literally giving children, sometimes less than 6 years of age, the supercomputer in their pocket that has more computational power by far than the computers that put humans on the moon for the first time in 1969, right? Like, it's a bad idea. It's a
It
bad idea,
is.
right? We need to really sort of think about that just at its surface. So point number one, right? We need to have the conversation, and I think people now are much more aware of the problem. Like you went right to the solution, because I think it's just become accepted that this is an issue. What do we do? And I just try to sort of step back for a second and say, well, let's just frame what the issues actually are, and think about them a little bit, because the solutions have to be connected to the specific problems, right? And there isn't just one problem here, there's many. And the point of the book is to think from a developmental neuroscience perspective. I'll explain that in a minute. Once we understand what's happening in the brain at different developmental stages, how children at each stage are using media, then we could tailor solutions that are developmentally appropriate. And I think that's critically important, because the brain goes through these powerful developmental stages that every parent experiences firsthand, and we need to tailor our solutions to them.
So let's talk a little bit about, what do you think are some of the positives and negative impacts of technology on society? Kind of taking the conversation a little bit up from where we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think the positives are pretty clear, right? Like I said a moment ago, like the ability to have a productivity device. I could check my email, I could look up information, I can communicate. The ability to connect asynchronously or even synchronously with video chat and phone. The ability to not only consume media, but to actually generate media. I mean, we've all become media channels now, right? We take videos of ourselves and post it online. And the ability to entertain ourselves. I mean, it just goes on, and commerce, and conduct commerce. I mean, this platform is incredibly powerful, and we all use it. I enjoy it. I mean, to be clear, I'm not against technology. I think it absolutely has changed all of our lives in many ways for the better, no doubt. But like all things, it can cut more than one way. The classic metaphor is of the knife, right? In the hands of a surgeon, it's a tool for healing. In the hands of a murderer, it's a tool for destruction and death, right? So it's about intent. So no question, the positive impacts are there. The negatives, as we were just starting to describe, are also there. And again, so if you have something this powerful, as I was saying before, society needs to kind of organize itself in a way to do something about it. The other metaphor or analogy I use in the book, I talk about 1908 in Detroit. What happened in 1908 in Detroit? Well, Henry Ford and the Model T started to roll off the assembly line, and automobiles for the first time became affordable. Right. So again, you have a new technology, in this case, the automobile, that's affordable and accessible. And Detroit became a test bed for what would happen if a lot of people had cars. Now, this is happening at a time there's no rules of the road. There's no training, and it was a disaster. People died, children died, farmers went crazy because people driving cars in the car fields. There weren't proper roads. It took 10 years, Anna, before the first stop sign was actually put in place in Detroit. Another 3 years before the patent for a stoplight was actually filed. And then we went on this, roughly 100-year journey where cars got safer, right? We put seatbelts in, we put airbags in, signage on the road got better, we put lights in, we put, dividing lines, guardrails, all kinds of things were put in place. And death per mile went down year after year after year for many years, until 2016, when people, started to overuse these devices in the car. And then this amazing irony, all that work started to get undone. But the point is, we can and will and must, as a society, begin to just sort of, put our thinking caps on and think about ways we can do something.
What I'd love to do is kind of dig into the process that you've kind of built, right? So can you describe the process you've developed for rebalancing technology and human connection?
That's right. So I talk about tech life balance, right? And it's aspirational, right? Because it's not something that we will instantly achieve. But I make as I was writing the book, I started to get a little depressed because I was stunned at how much research actually already existed and how this sort of framework of like thinking developmentally and what impact all this technology has, not just on our brain, but on a particularly important part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, really started to stun me. And let's just talk for a moment about the prefrontal cortex because it actually connects to the recommendations. So the prefrontal cortex sits behind our forehead and our eye sockets. It's the most highly evolved part of the brain. It's the most interconnected part of the brain. It consumes 1/3 of the calories that our brain consumes. And it is the difference between impulse and insight, reaction and reflection, and distraction and attention. It is also the modulator, the brakes on the gas of the reward and the emotion system in the brain. And I always like to say at this point, for many decades, even today, a lot of parents are befuddled by teenagers, right? It's this weirdly awkward time, right? We can't understand teenagers. They're so emotional, they're so impulsive, but yet they're so insightful and so interesting. Well, the teenage years are very interesting from a brain development perspective because the emotion centers and the reward centers, thanks to hormones and development, are starting to race ahead of the prefrontal cortex. And this is thought to be, from an evolutionary perspective, necessary for separation from the family, right? We have to be able to be willing to take risk in order to separate and go out in the world and have children and procreate on our own. But it's a very vulnerable time because we don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, which is bringing in information, tamping down emotions, controlling our reward centers to the point where we can make good decisions. All right. And then around our mid-20s, the prefrontal cortex is fully developed. And in theory, we go on to have adulthood. So the 10 recommendations in the book, of which I'll share some, are all designed to boost our prefrontal cortex, to support this very delicate and critically important part of our brain, which separates us from all other species on the planet. And allows us to build powerful technologies like the smartphone and give it support. So would you like me to walk through a couple of those?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so the first one I talk about is to stop multitasking and to embrace monotasking, right? So why is multitasking happening so commonly, and why is it detrimental, right? So first, let's define what I define as media multitasking. So media multitasking is doing one media activity, whether you're consuming, television, you're on your phone, listening to radio, and then doing another task. It might be another media task, like watching TV and being on your phone, or it might be, folding laundry while you're listening to radio, right? Now, those are two very different things, right? Watching TV and communicating with someone on your phone is different than sort of, doing some light housework and listening to a podcast, right? So there are different types of multitasking, but study after study after study has clearly shown that multitasking of any sort increases error rate and decreases processing time, right? So you end up in this situation where you are stressing out the prefrontal cortex in a way that over time can have the same consequences of any stress on the prefrontal cortex, like reduced sleep, substance abuse, and other things. Now, why do we do it is the question, right? So this is one of those brain tricks, right? We have learned over time that the harder we work, the more productive we typically are. And generally that's actually right. But when we're multitasking, we have to work harder to do or attempt to do both tasks. And so we think we're working harder when we're actually not working smarter. We're making errors and process time. And we're stressing out our already stressed out prefrontal cortex. So number one, really be thoughtful, whether it's at work or in social interactions in particular, put the phone away, focus on the other person, really try to be present and do one thing at a time. So that's number one. Number two, I talk about embracing JOMO over FOMO. So FOMO, as many of your listeners know, is the fear of missing out. JOMO is the joy of missing out. And so, really understanding that we are being, sort of enticed and titillated by powerful algorithms and large companies whose sole purpose is to keep our eyes and our attention on the screen in an effort to sell advertising and make money, that's really all about them and not about us, right? And so the joy of missing out is just realizing that, just like we don't let our children or even adults, sit around and eat donuts and cake all day. A little bit of sugar is nice every now and then, and it makes us feel good, and it's celebratory, and it's sweet on the palate. But too much leads to weight gain, diabetes, heart disease, and all kinds of problems, right? So same thing has to apply to our use of social media, which is filled with misinformation, filled with microaggressions, and filled with the erroneous illusion that we are actually connecting with other people when we're not. Real connection occurs face to face in a synchronous way with human touch when we can and when it's appropriate, not through screens and not through social media.
Well, you know what, Carl, we're kind of getting to wrapping up here, but I have to tell you that JOMO, I think, should be our tagline for this podcast, because that is joy of missing out. I can't wait to tell every teenager in my household that it's okay to miss out on certain activities. What closing thoughts would you like to leave the audience with, and a power word that we can kind of leave the audience with?
Well, I think the closing thought is the last recommendation I make in the book, which is to take a real break. And by taking a real break, what I mean is really shutting down, allowing ourselves to be bored, and develop some new habits away from technology, including, and I would put this at the top of the list, learning how to meditate, right? The data on just basic, simple meditation is overwhelming in terms of how it not only protects the prefrontal cortex, it allows us to learn how to tolerate boredom. It allows us to connect with ourselves. We cannot connect with others until we're connected with ourselves. It actually resets the emotion and reward systems in the brain. And it's simple and easy, and any age can do it, right? So I would say, a New Year's resolution for everyone is to think about, and ironically, you can get an app to help you do it. But this, again, if I were to just make one recommendation, that at any age and every age, we all need to sort of learn how to turn off. The data and the studies are very powerful. This is sort of the one magic bullet with no side effects and only upside that I would recommend everyone start to embrace.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carl. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on the AI to Z podcast with Anna Frazzetto. If you found value in today's episode, consider following for more insightful STEM discussions. We'll be back with another deep dive. Until then.